104% tariffs on China. That could be the reality starting this week, according to President Trump.
I have a great relationship with President Xi. I hope it's going to stay that way. I have great respect for China, but they can't do this we're going to have one shot at this, and no other president's going to do this, what I'm doing. And I'll tell you what, it's an honor to do it.
So how do we get to 104% tariff? To the math. First, you got to understand these are just the new tariffs being put on China since President Trump took office. There are already existing tariffs on certain Chinese imports coming into the United States, but I want to focus on these new ones because that's where the escalation is happening. So in February, President Trump put 10% tariffs on China. Then in March, he put another 10% tariff on China. These two, he said, were because of fentanyl. Then last week, you remember that big Rose Garden ceremony? President Trump announced the so-called kind reciprocal tariffs. Remember that big chart? Well, on that chart, China was hit with 34% tariffs. And late last week, China saw that number and said, hey, we're going to slap the United States with 34% tariffs on American goods going into China. Well, last night, President Trump said, hey, China, I see that you retaliated against my 34% tariff. So unless you pull those back, I'm going to add another 50% to your tariffs. Now, let's just do the simple math. You add that all together. That's how you get to 104% tariffs. And as I've reported repeatedly, you and me, the consumer, is the one who pays that tariff. China does not pay that amount. The person who imports the item into the United States pays that amount. And do you think American importers are just going to eat that amount of cost? No! Maybe they'll pay for some of it, but they certainly will not swallow all 104%. That increased cost is obviously going to be passed on to you. Look, I know you're going to ask, well, how much does China tariff U.S. imports going into their country? That answer is very difficult to quantify because before this new round of tariffs from Trump, every single item that we imported from China had sort of a different tariff percentage. Remember that 67% number the president put on that big chart last week that China was charging American imports? Well, according to the Trump administration, that is not the tariff percentage China is charging U.S. imports. What you saw on that chart was a totally different thing. It wasn't tariffs. It was based on trade deficits. And for the record, President Biden also put tariffs on China too. He not only kept the tariffs that Trump imposed on China during his first term, but then he added very strategic tariffs on China. But his were targeted on things like electric vehicles, advanced batteries, steel, aluminum, medical equipment. And they didn't all just hit at once. They were phased in over 3 years. So under Biden, the tariffs were not like this massive sticker shock all at one time, like what we're seeing now. So what's going to happen this week? Well, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday are going to be critical days. If China does not pull back its 34% tariff by tomorrow, starting on Wednesday, the United States is going to add that 50% tariff. Then also on Wednesday, the original 34% tariff on China and reciprocal tariffs on all those other countries will take effect. And then on Thursday, that's the day China will hit the U.S. imports with 34% tariffs. The White House claims leaders of several countries have already called President Trump to try and negotiate their tariffs down. China did not. So, is President Trump willing to negotiate? Well, he said no, then he said maybe. Today, he said he's not looking to pause his tariff plan. In the Oval Office this afternoon, Trump said two things can be true at the same time. He says it's possible tariffs will be permanent, and it's also possible that he'll negotiate. I know those two things contradict each other, but that's what he said. Bottom line here, I think we're just going to have to buckle up for another bumpy week.